And here we go. Okay. So, and I'm going to share screen, just jump right off the bat. So we are in the midst of an article. We'll just go to the top. It's Judaism 101, Prayers and Blessings. So the first one, first little subject was generally on the subject of prayer, the need for prayer, mindset for prayer. We had an interesting discussion last time on that. Hebrew as a language for prayer. I remember once being stopped on the streets of, I don't remember what city in Israel, and this was long before I was even thinking about being a rabbi. And I don't know if I asked someone a question, I asked it in English, and the guy said, "Don't you speak Hebrew?" And I said, "No, I'm sorry, I don't." And he said, when you die and you go to before the heavenly court to defend your life, the proceedings are going to be in Hebrew, and you're going to be in big trouble. And even now, I don't think I could raise even more than a fairly simplistic defense of myself. I know how to say I'm sorry.
I think what would be funny is if it turns out that it's in biblical Hebrew and not modern Hebrew, and he can't do any better than you can.
Well, yeah, that's actually an interesting point. Although, as we talked last time, modern Hebrew is actually based on biblical Hebrew, but it certainly has changed. But that is a very good point.
Weren't there 70 languages in the story of the Tower of Babel? 70 languages?
Yes, yeah, in the Tower of Babel.
Was Hebrew one of them?
Presumably, but I don't think the biblical text actually goes into that level of detail.
Okay.
Okay.
I would think that God could basically speak in any language that he wanted and be heard in the native language of the individual.
Oh yeah.
That she wanted, Bryce.
Exactly.
Thank you for correcting.
I mean, wouldn't God be all things? So what's the word for a combination of he and she?
Yes, they in modern.
They.
Or I just try and substitute the word God whenever I can,
Exactly.
to avoid gender. Yeah, and well, clearly, and I think we even read in the section on Hebrew that you can pray in any language, but that didn't convince the guy I bumped into. And one of the things, I was talking about this actually over dinner with one of the people over our house the other night. Was this dear friend of mine who's a Catholic scholar, and the church in the 60s, I think it was part of Nostra Aetate, the Catholic Church decided that for the most part, congregations can apply for exemptions. For the most part, Mass in the church will be conducted in the vernacular. And I think that's true. And in most Catholic churches, you don't hear a lot of Latin. I don't even know if you hear any Latin. I haven't been to so many Catholic churches. There still are Catholic churches that that have asked for and received permission to conduct their services in Latin. I do think that if you go to a Greek Orthodox church, a lot of the service will be in Greek. Partially because I love Hebrew, but there's also a part of me that sort of just likes the exotic nature of a foreign language. And so I kind of like the idea of conducting services in Hebrew. And of course, as a congregational rabbi, I would say we are probably striking the right balance if I get an equal number of complaints of people that want more Hebrew and people that want less Hebrew. And I remember one time, my making a statement, I really don't use a lot of Hebrew in my service. And then I sort of listened to myself and I realized it wasn't true. I do use a lot of Hebrew when I would lead services, and partially because I just love Hebrew. Okay, so welcome folks that have trickled in. Let's go to the subject of prayers and blessings from Judaism 101 to the subject of group prayer. So would someone like to read about group prayer? Joanne, you read a lot last time? Bryce, your other designated reader, would you like to jump in on your new big monitor?
Yeah, let me just move you to a monitor here so I can see the whole thing. Sure.
By the way,
Right.
I hope I'm not insulting anyone, but I saw something on Facebook that I got a kick out of. And they said, don't trust anyone whose TV screen is bigger than their bookshelf. I kind of like that. And I apologize if that.
I think this is a
offensive.
Gen X, it's a Gen X bias.
Yeah, could be.
What if you have more than one bookshelf?
Oh, my God. I have lots of
assume it's
bookshelves. I
based
have
on the total
more
size,
bookshelves
not
than screens. So I guess you take the total square meters
Oh,
of the
boy,
information.
That's a big,
Yep.
big monitor. Wow.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
most of our prayers are expressed in the first person plural, us, instead of me, and are recited on behalf of all of the Jewish people. This form of prayer emphasizes our responsibility for one another and our interlinked fates.
Yeah, I'll just comment. The suffix for we in verbs is nu. So you will hear this a lot. Avinu Malkeinu, our father, Lois, our father, our king, or our parent, our ruler, depending on how you want to translate it. We have the vidui, the confession is Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Devarna Dokfi, and so on, but most of them end in nu. So it is generally true that most prayers have a we format. Bryce, let's continue.
By the way, just wanted to say, Lois, I'd be perfectly happy to put everything off on women and let you run the whole place.
Yeah, clearly we haven't
Well,
done such a great job.
After Rabbi Lotker is finished with our class, I can tell all of you what happened with my sister and me on Friday night with the Hollywood Beach Chabad.
Okay, we'll look forward to hearing that. Alan.
Okay.
My question is that I never thought about in all the communal way in which I remember I think about during the Yom Kippur liturgy, I never think about the communal part as Jewish people, and so this is more, I'm trying to process it because I always think it's the community that I'm part of, and I don't think of it being only the Jewish people, but this is very.
Okay, so actually I'm going to ask you because now I don't know in which direction you're going. So I tend to think of it, the we, as our community. We have sinned and so on, rather than the Jewish people have sinned.
That's me. Yeah, that's exactly why and I'm not disagreeing with this statement. Right. It just wasn't the way I have thought about it. That's
right.
all.
But you're not saying the whole world has sinned. So you're there's a lot of ways you can interpret we. In the middle is the Jewish people. Smaller would be our community. Larger would be the entire world. But I must admit, I think of it as the community of people reciting the prayer rather than the entire Jewish people. Yeah. And Stephen.
Okay. Early on, well, two things. When a new sin is committed for the first time that's never been committed before, so there's only one person so far that has committed it until the second person does. Does the person who still say we, or they say I until a second person has committed that sin and then it becomes we?
Well, so again, we'll fall back on the issue which is central to Jewish prayer, and that is Jewish prayer is formulaic. Jewish prayer is minted. There are specific prayers. We do have an opportunity for silent prayer where you talk directly to God and presumably listen for a response. But all of these prayers are written in a prayer book, and they're always written in the we form.
Yeah, but that's now when you're talking, and at this point, all of the sins that are in the prayer book have probably already been committed by more than two people. What I'm saying, the question is,
yes, you're getting cute, and I just can't go there because
when Adam and Eve prayed,
We
As-
don't have
assuming they
any indication that Adam and Eve prayed,
Okay.
nor was eating the fruit ever described as a sin in the
Okay.
Bible.
Okay. Cain and Abel.
Yes.
The
So
que- so-
Cain does say my sin was too great for me to prayer, but here to bear, or my sin or my punishment, it's actually translated different ways. I think the word
Okay.
he says avon, which is sin. But again, the kind of prayer we're talking about in this article are the prayers minted by the rabbis of the Talmud, not biblical stuff. And they are community prayers. And there's no example in the Bible of community prayer, of people getting together to pray. That is a Talmudic invention. It's post-biblical. Okay. I don't know.
Ready to go.
Okay.
In Judaism, prayer is largely a group activity rather than an individual activity, although it is permissible to pray alone and it fulfills the obligation to pray. You should generally make every effort to pray with a group, short of violating a commandment to do so. A complete formal prayer service cannot be conducted without a quorum of at least 10 adult Jewish men. That is, at least 10 people who are obligated to fulfill the commandment to recite the prayers. This prayer quorum is referred to as a minyan, from a Hebrew root meaning to count or to number. Certain prayers and religious activities cannot be performed without a minyan. This need for a minyan has often helped to keep the Jewish community together in isolated areas.
And before Lois hastens to make me acknowledge this, certainly the Reform and conservative movements, and I would think just about all the other movements now count women in a minyan, because of the underlying point that recognizes that women are also obligated to pray. So the principle is the same, namely, you need 10 Jews who are obligated to pray. So you wouldn't count a Jewish male under 13. And again, in Reform, men and women are both considered for bar and bat mitzvah at 13. So children would not be counted in a minyan, but both men and women would be counted in a minyan.
Are you saying that in Orthodox communities now they're counting women in minyans?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
No,
Although I'm pretty
I
sure.
think in many conservative communities, women are counted. I don't know that it's universal, but I'm not aware of Orthodox.
I think in
counting
modern, I'm fishing a little for my memory, but I think in some more modern Orthodox communities, women do count for a minyan.
Yeah, I've never heard that, but you might be right.
No, okay, I'm not on. Okay.
Yeah. And it's the point was that they're obligated to do so. So then the question is, if women are not, and I think we've discussed this many times, that in traditional Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, women are exempted from positive time-bound commandments. Positive meaning the thou shalts, and time-bound means that commandment only applies at a certain time of day. So since prayer is a thou shalt, you must pray, and it applies morning, afternoon, and evening, that falls into the general category of positive time-bound commandments from which women are exempt. And depending on how you view that tradition, you can either say, well, women have to be exempt because somebody has to stay home and watch the kids while dad is off praying, or you can listen to those who would say women are already at a higher spiritual level and don't need the added discipline of time-bound prayer. And in terms of the minyan of 10, there I would say, even in the Reform world, there are many rabbis I know that will insist on having a minyan to pray. And there are rules, and because I don't insist on, if 7 or 8 people show up for services, and believe me, it has happened, I will still conduct the same service that I would if we had a minyan.
Especially Shiva Minyan, Shivas.
Yes,
especially.
yes, yeah, we'll talk about that, and actually, that's worth even discussing separately. Whereas in strict tradition, you can conduct a prayer service, but there are many prayers you don't say out loud. And the Baruch Hu is one, and the Kaddish is another one. And my understanding of that is for the prayers that you don't say aloud are prayers that call for a congregational response. So if you think of the Baruch Hu, and I hope you know what prayer I'm talking about, where the leader says, Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach, blessed is Adonai who is blessed, and that's a command. It's a command to who? The congregation. So the congregation says, Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Blessed is Adonai, the blessed one, forever and ever. So you need a congregational response. So then the question arises, how many Jews does it take to make a congregation? And they're going to have to decide on a number, right? And the answer is 10. So how do they come up with 10? There are 2 places in the Bible where that number comes out. One is when Abraham argues with God about saving Sodom and Gomorrah. They finally, Abraham is trying to reduce the number over and down from 50, and they finally decide on 10, and Abraham doesn't go any further. And of course, there aren't 10 in Sodom and Gomorrah, so the cities get destroyed. And then also, when the spies enter the land in the book of Numbers, there were 10 spies, and they were called a name. I think it's Kahal, and that number is often in later Hebrew used for congregation. Stephen, do you have a question?
Why does he stop at 10? I mean, there
We
are
don't know.
4 that are found. If he kept going a little farther,
Yeah.
the city would have been spared.
We don't know. But that's the Bible we have. So what I'm reporting is when the rabbis have to figure out a number for a minimum, they would say, in the spirit of that story, you need 10 observant people, at least to the degree that they're there in synagogue to pray, in order to have a community. And so if prayers need a communal response,
I don't think they need to be there for the purpose of praying. I think if somebody happens to be there for some other reason, you can still count
they have
them.
to physically be in the room. Yes, you're right. They can be reading the newspaper. And of course, I'll just say one more thing in Kol Alan. When we recite the Mourner's Kaddish, there are a bunch of responses. There's a bunch of amens. There's a brichu. There's Yehesh Mei Rabba Mavorach Le'olam Lamei Olayah. So there are congregational responses, and therefore that's a prayer that falls into this category. Alan.
I'm just remembering that during COVID, when I regularly attended services in Adelaide, Australia, the Reformed Synagogue, the rabbi was sensitive to the count of having 10 in order to include the prayers in a Shabbat service that were relevant. And she knew that I often didn't stay the whole time. So she wanted to know whether I was going to stay the whole time because it affected how she would conduct the.
Oh, that's interesting. So you were physically in Australia at that time.
I know I was physically in Palo Alto, but
okay. So on Zoom.
I'm indirectly bringing up the question of virtual, who weren't present, but were present in the way in which the technology made people present, not. And the example I'm remembering is the Australia one, because when I said I'm not going to stay,
that was significant to her.
It was significant the way she conducted the service. Yeah.
And there was a lot of discussion, both in the Reform movement and in the conservative movement. And I'm always, in some ways, as interested in the conservative movement's response to this as the Reform movement's response, because conservative Judaism takes Jewish law as binding. So the question arises, can a Zoom prayer service constitute a minyan? That's the question. And the answer is actually more nuanced than you think. What they decided in the conservative movement, I'm pretty sure this is the case, is you can count the attendees in a minyan if you can see them and hear them respond. So those of you who are Zoom aficionados know that there's a form of Zoom conference where you just see the people, you know, in
Yep.
the panel, and you can't participate. I can't remember now what they call that.
Like a webinar, a
A
webinar.
webinar, that's exactly it. So what the conservative movement said was, and the Orthodox, I think some Orthodox authorities said that was the case also, as long as people could be seen and heard in their responses. Of course, I think in the Orthodox world, they would not allow virtual, I'll just call them Zoom prayer services on Shabbat, because you can't use electricity on Shabbat. So what they did was, in many cases, is they would have, I mean, in Israel, they ignored it, and there was a lot of COVID in Israel, in the ultra-Orthodox world. In other places, they would just have people widely dispersed on a lawn, and as long as you had 10 of them that could hear each other, which isn't greatly, terribly difficult, they would do that on Shabbat.
The conservative movement at the beginning of COVID, they actually made a conscious, deliberate ruling that allowed for electricity, so to speak, on Shabbats that they wouldn't have done in the past.
Yes, and it was an emergency ruling, which meant once the emergency had passed, which I would say certainly is true now. I don't know if they officially, declared the ruling null and void, but it wasn't a generic ruling that you can use Zoom on Shabbat for services. It was a ruling that would apply only while there was a health risk.
Conservative movement is like reform, if I can say it this way, is that individual synagogues and rabbis have a lot of latitude in what they do in things like this, right? So some conservative rabbi synagogue near me wasn't using electricity on Shabbat, and they are using it now since COVID. So they adopted it more generally. But I believe that falls into the category of as opposed to the Catholic Church, is that all the reforming conservative, let me say it that way, there's a reasonable amount of latitude locally on these things.
I would say that is true. And actually, we're going to read an article. Probably won't get to it tonight at the rate we're going. Well, we are going to read an article on Jewish law. But a big difference, again, my characterization in the Reform movement is that ethical Jewish law is binding on all Jews. Ritual Jewish laws are between you and God. But in the conservative movement, Jewish law is binding on everyone, ethical and ritual. What individual Jews do is up to them, and what individual rabbis do in synagogues to set the local pattern is up to them. And the interesting thing, if you're really interested in this subject, is that in the Conservative Law Committee, when they have a controversial subject, like can homosexuals be admitted to rabbinical school, or can a rabbi conduct marriages between people of the same gender, the law committee will often come up with two rulings, and one may be a majority and one may be a minority. And in that case, individual synagogues can follow their own, can pick one. But for example, a conservative rabbi cannot officiate at a Jewish wedding, at an interfaith wedding, cannot officiate at an interfaith wedding. And until recently, a conservative rabbi could not even attend an interfaith wedding, even if the wedding was with his own or her own child. They weren't allowed to attend. They changed that rule a few years ago. Okay, I'll register your displeasure.
I just wanted to say something
Yeah,
too, is that you're going to think that this is facetious, but it's not at all, because I am logically stuck for why this wouldn't be possible. So a refrigerator, you're going to have a kosher setting for the refrigerator.
Yes.
Okay. And you can even have like a light, as long as you don't turn on the light, you can have a light on.
Yes.
You can't turn it on.
Or
So why couldn't you just start the Zoom session on a Friday, leave it going, and then just do it on a Saturday, as long as nobody starts it.
It's a
Because
very
they
good, hold on. I think Stephen is going to give you a facetious answer if I'm,
If a
I'm
real
looking
answer,
for the serious one.
no, I will give you the serious one. So the reason actually is the microphone. When you speak, you are causing an electric current to flow.
Okay.
And actually, I once had an Orthodox rabbi who was the uncle of one of my the brother of one of my congregants, and his son was celebrating his bar mitzvah, and his uncle attended, and he attended the Reform service that I led, and he actually read and chanted Haftarah, and he requested that we take the microphone away from the bima when he was chanting the Haftarah. So, and by the way, Bryce, there's a principle where there's a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way. So if the rabbis wanted to figure out a way to do that, they could, but technically that would be the reason. You can watch television on Shabbat as long as you don't turn it on, and
Change
you're
the
not
channel.
and you don't change the channel. And there's interesting issues about whether you can put timers on lights, and it can get a little crazy. Alan.
I think the microphone is interesting. After the Tree of Life, at least that period, the synagogues in my area started to have security discussions. And for the non-reform, this subject doesn't apply to reform, concern of, for safety, should the rabbi keep a cell phone on the a cell phone on the bima, because like in the story of the Tree of Life, from the bima you would see the intruder, and the conclusion for those who had the more sensitivity about tradition, they bring the cell phone and turn it on in a way that it wouldn't be in their judgment, it wouldn't be violating anything. Although some people would argue using it at any time is fine for saving a life.
Yes.
So,
I mean, that's where I would go.
Yeah, but I think there was this debate, and having it turned on before Shabbat was part of the answer, like the Zoom question that you just brought.
So I would say there's a general principle that if you need to violate Jewish law in order to save life or health, you should do it in the minimum way possible. Joanne, you're nodding. Maybe that's what you wanted to talk about. We can't hear you, but you are not muted. My guess is you haven't selected the right microphone. That is just a guess of mine based. We still don't hear you. Yes, a guess based on thousands of hours on Zoom. So I'll give an example of that. I actually have a manual written by an Orthodox rabbi here in Los Angeles about being a hospital chaplain, and they talked about issues like, you're in a patient's room, and you want to turn up the lights or turn down the lights for the comfort and health of the patient, and the first thing you do, although this may offend your sensibilities, is if there's no other way to do it, you ask a non-Jew to do it, because that's less problematic than a Jew doing it. But then he said also, if you're going to ask a Jew to do it, he should work, or she should work, the light switch with his or her elbow, rather than doing it with their hands, as a way of saying or acknowledging that I'm conscious of the fact that I'm violating Jewish law, in pursuit of pikuach nefesh, in pursuit of health.
Did this traditional person ask a Reform Jew to actually turn off the lights?
He might. I mean, I know the guy, and he's very practical. He's not.
First, asking a Jew to do it, another Jew to do it, even if they're less is observant, is just as bad as doing it yourself. And if it is necessary for something to be done by a Jew, it's preferable that it be the most, and it's to save a life, it's preferable to be the most observant Jew, so that it's clear that it's being done to save the life, and not just somebody being non-observant.
Yeah, and it would be an interesting question to ask him, but the point was that you do it with your elbow, so you don't lose sight of the fact that you're violating Shabbat, you recognize you're doing. You're not turning on or off the light switch just because you're ignoring the rules of Shabbat. I don't know, Joanne, if you want to try being heard again.
Do you hear
Yeah.
me now?
Yes, we hear you. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was totally agreeing with everything you were saying. And just, the world has changed so much since the pandemic opened that I just, believe that some of the laws and regs have to be modified because of the extenuating circumstances, to try to
Yeah.
work around it as best as we can.
Yes. So the interesting point is, I think, even in the Orthodox world, they would agree. Not every Orthodox authority would agree. But then once the emergency is over, do you go back to the old way? And I would think in the conservative and Orthodox world, they would say, yes, you should not
Yeah.
attend services by Zoom. You should physically attend. In the
Right.
Reform world, that we have changed. And I don't think we're going back. Okay, let's continue with blessings. Bryce?
Barakot blessings.
It's actually berachot. It's juicy.
Well, I could do that, but
Yes, okay.
I don't want to overdo the microphone.
Okay.
Beracha, bless,
Berachot. Oh, sorry. Baracha, yes.
baracha, or they should have accent graves over this stuff.
Baracha.
to
Yeah,
help
I
us.
would say, the Sephardic way would be beracha. The Ashkenazi way would be baracha, I
Okay.
think. Anyway.
So beracha, blessing, is a special kind of prayer that is very common in Judaism. Berachot are recited both as part of the synagogue services and as a response or prerequisite to a wide variety of daily occurrences. Berachot are easy to recognize. They all start with the word Baruch,
Mhm.
blessed or praised. The words Baruch and Beracha are both derived from the Hebrew root Beit Resh Kaf, meaning knee or chni, and
No.
refer to the, I'm joking, and refer to the practice of showing respect by bending the knee and bowing. There are several places in Jewish liturgy where this gesture is performed, most of them at a time when a beracha is being recited.
So I would say that is definitely one theory, that the word berech means knee. And philologists speculate that may be the reason that the word is used for blessing, but there are places we bend our knees other than in a blessing. And the Amidah, for those of you who are, who really follow services, you'll recognize that. There's another theory, Berecha is a pond of water, a pool of water. And I remember reading some speculation that saying a baracha is like jumping into a pool of water. It heightens your awareness of things around you. Okay, let's continue.
According to Jewish tradition, a person should recite 100 berachot at each day. This is not as difficult as it sounds. Repeating the Shemoneh Ezra'i 3 times a day.
Yeah, so it's the Shmona Esrei. And
well, I just try to pronounce those
Yep.
vowels. Shemona Ezrei, 3 times a day, as all observant Jews do, covers 57 berachot all by itself. And there are dozens of everyday occurrences that require berachot.
And probably not tonight, but I actually copied a bunch of pages from an Orthodox prayer book to just show you the wide variety of daily blessings. And we'll take a look.
Who
at Alan,
blessed this?
hold on, Alan, you have your actual hand up, and you need to unmute.
Yeah, but I wanted to go back to the 57 or the 3 times 19. Does that include the things of morning blessings where you're grateful for? It doesn't include this. So that adds to the 57.
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
So
Well,
yeah, so if the Shemona Esrei is 19 sections times 3, that's how we got the 15.
Right.
And then of course you say it both out loud and you say it quietly to yourself, so that doubles it. We're already at 114. And then the morning blessings and, eating bread and yeah, there's a traditional Jew says a lot of blessings. And my understanding is the custom of keeping your head covered applies because you're saying blessings. I mean, a traditional Jew doesn't keep, I'll say, his head covered when he sleeps, when he goes in a shower. I mean, you could imagine if it was important, we could easily make a shower cap. But it's when you're saying blessings. Okay, Bryce.
So I was just going to say, a very observant man gets to heaven, and he said, and God says, "I don't think you're sufficiently holy." And the guy says, "What are you talking about? And I've been saying the Barachot like 40,000 times a
Right.
day. I say it all day long." And he says, "But did you really mean them?"
Well, again, we discussed this question of kavanah. So are you saying these blessings with the proper intention? But I would say, particularly in the Orthodox world, the important thing is to get them said rather
Yep.
than, I mean, it's kind of like, after a party or, a birthday party or a wedding or something, you're sending out thank you notes. Do you
Yep.
really mean every thank you note? Yes or no? But it's still important
Well,
to send them out.
Something I didn't want.
I'm sorry?
I said, well, some of the gifts were probably things you didn't want.
Well, yeah, and you don't change your approach to writing a thank you note. Maybe some do, but I would not recommend it. So who blesses whom?
Many English-speaking people find the idea of Barachot very confusing. To them, the word blessing seems to imply that the person saying the blessing is conferring some benefit on the person he is speaking to. And one might be forgiven for that. For example, in Catholic tradition, a person making a confession begins by asking the priest to bless him. Yet in a beracha, the person saying the blessing is speaking to God. How can the creation confer a benefit upon the creator? This confusion stems largely from difficulties in the translation. The Hebrew word baruch is not a verb describing what we do to God. It is an adjective describing God as the source of all blessings. When we recite a beracha, we are not blessing God, we are expressing wonder at how blessed God is.
Yeah.
The beginning of a beracha, Baruch atah, is not I bless you, but
No.
rather an awe-filled you are blessed.
Blessed are you.
Yes, and that's actually, again, the Hebrew word baruch
Baruch.
can mean I'm blessing you, or it can be an adjective describing someone. Blessed are you. It's one of the many hundreds of ways Hebrew is wonderfully ambiguous.
But what does it mean to be blessed? What does that mean? In
What
other
does it
words,
mean to describe God as blessed?
Yes, I mean, how can, God is the creator of blessings. How can God be himself blessed? You
Yes.
see,
So the only thing I can say is
That's all people under.
is with the idea of bending a knee, is that we are addressing God as someone who is the source of blessings and therefore is blessed and is unique in some way. And I can't define it any more precisely than that. Alan.
it's a little tough to wrap my head around this concept of, because we've talked about blessings many, many times. And we've talked about the blessings that Isaac gave, and about how the blessing was something that could not be taken back.
Right.
And the blessing was almost as if it were a thing, and he gave
Yes.
a double portion of blessing, and now that's done, and you're stuck, and I'm sorry.
So Bryce, I'm going to say something to you that has the same status as when Jay Lieberman asked the question, who wrote this?
God knows.
No, that's a good one. But I would say the fact that you can't get your head around it, I can't get my head around it either. it doesn't diminish it. It means that this is not something we can get our head around. Try as we might, there are subjects that we cannot completely get our head around.
Hang on, agree.
Alan.
Content of a beracha, or is there someone
Hold on
that has
second.
a hand up?
Alan is sort of raising his hand. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm
Yeah.
just being polite. Okay, so here's what's going through my mind. I think it's written by Heschel, something about God doesn't need prayers, we need prayers.
Yes.
So
Ne-
the way in which we, or I'm trying to, include in this discussion is that when you say a blessing, you're conveying some appreciation or recognition of some behavior or event that has meaning to the person who gave it or the person who heard it. But it's that's and it does something that elevates the experience of probably both, if it's successful, both people, the giver or the receiver. So it's a process that was invented or created in our world, let's say, that serves that purpose that we're referring to as blessing, that benefits both parties and elevates, if I'm
Yes.
making sense.
And actually, that's the subject of this next section. So let's
And
take a look at that.
that actually makes a great deal of sense, Alan and Rabbi.
Yeah, it doesn't address your question, Bryce,
No,
though, of
it-
what does it mean to bless God
No, well, not only that. Well, but actually,
or describe
it
God
kind
as
of
blessing?
does. It
Okay,
kind of
good.
does.
Good.
All right, because if we are, participating in the saying that that kind of thing, you are blessed, then in a sense we are, without being presumptuous, as just saying we bless you. But the fact is that if we have the capacity to bless our fellow man at all, then we can participate in this exchange of blessedness. It just means that the meaning of blessing in the Isaac and that kind of thing, that's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to explore the text to see whether the term blessing is used. I think it is, but I'm not 100% certain.
I found
Sorry?
I found some ridiculous discussion online about if God sneezes.
Yeah. I really don't want to go there.
It's relevant to the sense of
So, and that's, but what I would say is, and I think the next section is going to discuss this, is if something good happens, such as you drink wine, or you win the lottery, or you wake up and your body is working, you open your eyes and you can see. It's, boy, am I lucky, is one response, or I actually need to thank God for this good thing happening to me. How do I thank God? Certainly with prayer, but as I talk about this a lot, but we thank God by sharing the good stuff. So yes, I have food today. In fact, I have too much food today. So how do I thank God for the abundance of 39 kinds of mustard and 62 kinds of olive oil? Is that I contribute to the food bank and I share the blessing of food with other people. But let's see what the article, actually, I think the article is going to address this directly. So
Content of a beracha. There are basically three types of berachot. One's recited before enjoying a material pleasure. Berachot hanacha,
hana'ah.
okay.
Mhm.
One's recited before performing a mitzvot, commandment. Berachot ha-mitzvot. And one's recited at special times and events. Berachot hoda'ah.
Yeah, very well pronounced. And hoda'ah means thanks. And we'll get there.
Berachot recited before enjoying a material pleasure, such as eating, drinking, or wearing new clothes, acknowledge God as the creator of the thing that we are about to use. The beracha for bread praises God as the one who brings forth bread from the earth. The beracha for wearing new clothing praises God as the one who clothes the naked. By reciting these berachot, we recognize that God is the creator of all things, and that we have no right to use things without first asking his permission. The beracha essentially asks permission to use the thing. Berachot recited before performing a mitzvah, a commandment such as washing hands or lighting candles, praise God as the one who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to do whatever it is that we are about to do.
So I'm going to interrupt for a second, and I know I teach this a lot. So if we're saying, you know, a motzi, we have the opening line, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, and then the object of the blessing, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, Borei pri hagafen, and so on. When it's a mitzvah blessing, we insert the line, Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, which is who sanctified us with his, commandments and commands us, and it's followed by a verb in the infinitive form.
Rabbi, a
Yes.
question. So I know the motzi isn't technically considered a commandment, which is why you just made this point. But in the Birkat HaMazon, where that's the origin of a commandment, isn't it?
No,
Saying
it's-
something
it's- Okay, so, and I think actually in the discussion of Jewish law, there is going to be a discussion of the two types of commandments, which I think I think it's either Aramaic or Rabbinic Hebrew. There's mitzvot deoraita, which means the commandments in the sacred texts. So a classic one would be a talit. It's clearly mentioned there. And then there's mitzvot de rabbanan, the mitzvot that the rabbis coin. And the rabbis are not shy about creating mitzvot and saying they are really in the text. And I think the article on Jewish law is going to discuss some of these. But the key phrase is, Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. So, for example, the interesting one is lighting Shabbat candles, or even lighting Hanukkah candles. Lighting Shabbat candles and Hanukkah candles are not in the Torah or Bible at all. They're in the Talmud, but the rabbis claim that God is commanding us to do so. So we include that language. I don't know technically whether saying, let's say, a motzi would be considered a rabbinic commandment or deoraita. I have a feeling it would be deoraita.
I don't think so, but the Hamatzon, the blessing after a meal, there's some link in the, and I don't remember where.
Yeah, there's a mention in the text, and you will eat and be satisfied, and thank God. And then the rabbi say, okay, how am I going to do this? And in this particular prayer book, it goes on for about 6 pages or more. And they say, that's how you do it.
You're hungry for the next meal by the time they're finished, of course.
Yeah, it's a problem, and you're also supposed to have a minyan. And so there's a different form when you don't have a minyan. And so on the airplane, next time you order a kosher meal, Alan, look for a little note with a piece of bread or something that looks like bread, because you'll see a little note in Hebrew saying this is not bread. So you don't say a motzi, because if you say a motzi, you have to say a full Birkat Hamazon, and you need a minyan, and you need to go on and on. So if they give you a nice cracker instead of bread, then you don't say the motzi, and you don't have to say the full Birkat. And these are things that we can thank God that we don't have to worry about, because we are not bound by those rules and regs. And there's a lot of them. There is a lot of them. Okay, so
reciting such a blessing is an essential element of the performance of a mitzvah.
Right here.
In Jewish tradition, a person who performs a mitzvah with a sense of obligation is considered more meritorious than a person who performs the same mitzvah because he feels like it. Recitation of the Beracha focuses our attention on the fact that we are performing a religious duty with a sense of obligation. It is worth noting that we recite such Berachot over both biblical commandments and rabbinical commandments. In the latter case, The beracha can be understood as one, or as who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to obey the rabbis who have commanded us to do whatever it is we are about to do. See halacha, Jewish law, for an explanation of the distinction between biblical and rabbinical commandments.
And we are gonna take a look at that. And you know, the simple example is Friday night we light Shabbat candles. We're lighting the Shabbat candles. The Hebrew phrase would be l'shem mitzvah, in the name of the mitzvah. We're not lighting the candles because we like candles on our dining room table. On Thursday night, when we light candles on our dining room table, they may look just as nice as Friday night, but they are not fulfilling a mitzvah. Okay, let's continue.
Berachot recited at special times and events, such as when seeing a rainbow, or a king, or hearing good or bad news, acknowledge God as the ultimate source of all good and evil in the universe. It is important to note that such berachot are recited for both good things and things that appear to us to be bad. When we see or hear something bad, we praise God as the true judge, underscoring the fact that things that appear to be bad happen for a reason that is ultimately just, even if we, in our limited understanding, cannot always see the reason.
And as I always say, you know, the blessing that they're referring to is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Dayan ha'emet, the true judge. And we say that at a funeral when we tear our garment or tear the ribbon as a sign of mourning. And the comment I always make, and I had a funeral Sunday, I have a funeral tomorrow, I have a funeral next Sunday. I don't know what's going on. But what the comment I always make is that perhaps when we are least likely to acknowledge God as a true judge, our religion fortifies our spiritual backbone by requiring us to do so. But that's my own sort of editorial comment. But we're blessing both the good and the bad. And when I run through this list in an Orthodox prayer book, you'll see all kinds of interesting blessings that you wouldn't think would be there.
As an editorial comment, I could just say that ultimately we should probably say it for good things too.
Oh,
because
we do.
he's
I mean,
the true, just say true judge, because,
that's
just because
interesting.
something appears to be good doesn't necessarily mean it is.
Oh, that's an interesting point. The formulaic blessing when something good happens is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hatov v'hametiv, which is you're blessing God who is good and who does good. Stephen.
It's a stupid question, but how do you know a half a week ahead of time when you're going to have a funeral?
Oh, because in my world, in the Reform world, people don't typically bury someone within 24 hours. I assume that's what you're referring to.
Well, I realize it's often in any world no longer within 24 hours because of like needing the coroner or whatever to sign off on stuff. But I half a week seems long. I thought it's like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, so Jewish law says 24 hours. And under Jewish law, you are allowed to delay a funeral for the honor of the deceased. And the specific example that I always hear mentioned is if, close relatives need to fly in from out of town, it's permissible to delay the funeral. And so then, the question is who makes the judgment? So in practice, in the Orthodox world, there is great emphasis on having a burial within 24 hours, not on Shabbat, not on certain holidays. I remember when Sonia's mother of blessed memory was dying in Casablanca, and we all thought the end was pretty close. We all got on a plane. I'm talking about all of her children and husbands, and spouses, sorry, got on a plane and headed out to Casablanca. And we really didn't know whether we would get there in time to attend her funeral, but they would not delay the funeral for us. In my world of Reform rabbis, it is not unusual at all to have a funeral several days, sometimes even weeks later, particularly if there's a cremation. And basically, the family is delaying the funeral so many people can attend. And that's the reason why I know in advance that I'm doing a funeral. Alan.
In Israel, if the death is in the city of Jerusalem, the burial is the same day by practice. Do you know? And I always found that the fact
Well,
that it's
that's
different.
within 24 hours, and you don't do it at
No,
night.
same day, same day.
I understand. But if a person dies at 10 in the evening,
I'm not sure
I'm-
what that means,
I-
but yeah,
so within 24 hours, and it's a daytime thing.
it's
That's
considered.
that's my understanding.
Yeah, what I understand is it's different for Jerusalem than every place else.
Well,
Because
I mean, that's actually odd because you can't bury anyone inside a walled city.
okay, well, that's okay, different subject then, but I'll try to get more background because I
Yeah, so
that
yeah,
I
so
put that
so
in the
I'm
news
not
all
sure
the time.
what in the world that's referring to.
Okay.
And there's actually an interesting subnote on that one, and that is that, traditionally the site of Jesus' death and burial is in a place in Jerusalem called the Church of the Holy
Sepulcher.
Sepulcher. I was going to say it
Sepulcher.
right, Bruce.
There you
Bryce, I was gonna
go.
say- and for a very long time, the Protestants rejected that idea, knowing that under Jewish law, you cannot bury someone inside a walled city. And the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is inside the walls of Jerusalem. So they actually found a site just outside the walls of Jerusalem and they call it the Garden Tomb. And there's even a big rock there that looks like a skull, which is what the meaning of the Aramaic word Golgotha.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and then modern archaeology discovered that in the time of Jesus, that site where that church is today was outside the walls. So it actually lended credibility to the tradition that church was in fact inside the was the actual burial place of Jesus. Stephen.
I've forgotten what I was going to say. It might be something you've already said, actually, or maybe I just
Okay.
left
Okay.
earlier.
I think okay. So I think we'll continue reading this article next time. Yeah, it's Wednesday. Yeah, we will meet next Wednesday. I think I do have some travel coming up, but not next Wednesday. And let's see, Lois, you were going to tell us a story. Would you like me to stop recording? I can't hear you. You're muted. Lois, you're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you.
So, okay.
There
So
you go.
I'm here in Silver Strand.
So my question, first of all, is would you like me to stop the recording, or are you okay having
It
this
doesn't
recording?
matter.
Okay,
You-
good.
Sure.
Okay.
It's not important. So anyway, I am here in Silver Strand. And
Is that Maryland? Where is that?
Silver Strand is the beach along the farthest of your south beaches. It's part of Oxnard. Actually, it's
Oh,
part
okay.
Okay.
All right.
Anyway, it's here in one of your beach cities here.
Okay.
It's Oxnard, not Ventura. Anyway, so we've been here a lot over the last 30 years. We've been here every summer. So my sister and I were together on Friday night already, and we took a ride to where Chabad used to be just to see, and they've moved twice. So anyway, we also went to see a restaurant we used to like, and it turns out that Chabad has, I guess, rented what was a gym in the same area where the restaurant was, and they were, a bunch of guys were doing davening for Shabbat Friday night. So my sister walked over there and they saw her, and Joy said, "Come on, let's go in." So we go in and we sit down on the other side of the mechitza. You can imagine Joyce and me
Mm-hmm.
being the side of mechitza. So the rabbi, whoever he is out here, he's a fairly young guy. He positioned himself so half his body was on the male side and half was on our side because there were no other women.
Oh, that's
Because,
nice.
as you said earlier tonight, they're taking care of the kids and cooking
Mhm.
Shabbat dinner and doing whatever the
Mhm.
women do. And he started talking. He talked a lot. I don't know if he was doing the parsha. I don't know what he was doing. He gave us prayer books, but he didn't look at what he was doing. So he gave Joyce one in English and me in Russian. It was like we couldn't stop laughing.
Oh,
It
that's
was
funny. Mhm.
dumb, but we were respectful. So he finally comes over to talk to us, and he said something. I don't know what he said, but I said, look, we grew up religious reform, which
Mhm.
doesn't even sort of make any sense to him, but because it's actually true.
Mhm.
Because we went every Friday night, we
Mhm.
belonged to the same Reformed synagogue,
Mhm.
our parents were both involved, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh, okay. And I said, yeah, and now I belong to a conservative synagogue. He says, which one? So I tell him. And then he wanted us to pray with them. And I said to him, look, I don't daven. I use the Yiddish. I don't daven with a mechitza. So he went silent and went on with his men. And finally, I said to Joyce, please, let's get out of here because it's like, it's offensive to me with their mechitza and the sort of strict it. And I have a lot of respect for them. I just want to say that while that bothers me, I have a lot of respect for Chabad. I think they've figured out what the rest of us haven't, which is outreach, and they're very successful, and the rest of us are not so successful and are shrinking in America, and they're growing. So we shouldn't be so arrogant. But anyway, we had a good time with the.
Yeah, so what I would say is, I mean, the fact that he positioned himself halfway and gave you books was his way of accepting you. And
Yes,
you knew there was a mechitza, so I
of
don't
course,
understand why you went in the first place if you find that offensive.
because my sister, they asked her, she came, so I went with her.
Right.
I mean, it it was a moment, you know, it wasn't, and it wasn't, we didn't make a big deal. He didn't make a big deal. He made some jokes. He's an American guy, and one of his jokes was he said he's from Brooklyn. He said, I grew up in Brooklyn. I have a black belt. So that's a
That's
joke.
funny. Yes. That's
Right? Because he's got his black belt around his black schmata. And so
yeah,
I said to him, that was a good joke.
This is how we know she was raised Jewish, religious
yeah.
reform.
It wasn't. I mean,
Religious
the
reform.
the Chabad rabbi in Oxnard is Dov Munchnik, but I don't think he is very young, so I don't know if that's
Well, this is in Oxnard, but down here at the beach.
okay.
And I
Okay,
don't
so
know how
maybe
many
it may be
spots
another
there
guy.
are.
So what I would say is, you know, clearly I don't agree with things in Orthodoxy, but I don't find them offensive. If I found them offensive, I would never go there.
Right.
If there were a Nazi rally, I would find that offensive and I wouldn't go there. But I'm not offended by anything in Orthodoxy. I understand they have different laws and traditions. And my attitude actually is when I interact with Orthodoxy and go to Orthodox services is what can I learn rather than how can I find reasons to be offended? My goal is what can I learn?
As I told you, that's the only thing that bothers me about any Orthodoxy. Because I know the history and what it's meant for women and what it took for women to be ordained in the conservative movement, the reform movement. And so you're not a woman either, Michael. So it's important to understand that especially someone like me who has such a strong background in Judaism. I mean, and then he starts talking, the Parsha was the red heifer. I know all this stuff. I know what the
Mhm.
Parsha is and
Mhm.
what it was that week. That was last night. Yeah, last Friday night. Anyway, it was just a moment here, and I have a lot of respect for them. They are all over the world. They're independent, I don't know, franchises. They're very entrepreneurial. Of
Yeah,
course, they
so I
work.
would say, you have respect for their business model, but probably not their theology. And of
I
course,
don't have any
Chabad,
trouble with their theology either. I have a trouble with their gender issues.
but that's part of the theology.
That's right, yeah.
Okay,
And
that's
and
okay.
what I would say is, I mean, that has been Judaism until about 50, 60 years ago. I mean, the first Reform woman rabbi is
Sally,
is
Sally Priestland,
Sally Priestland, who's actually in very bad health at the moment.
right?
But we're not talking about going back in ancient history. So it is fairly recent.
I know.
And
I
and
know.
the, and the theological issue is, can someone discharge an obligation for a community if they themselves are not obligated to that commandment? So as I understand it, the theological issue behind women being a rabbi and leading prayer services is, if a woman is not obligated to pray, can she lead prayers on behalf of a community?
And my answer to that is Lama.
Is why?
Why? I mean,
Okay, so would you
why
say, so
decide
hold on,
one
hold on,
way
hold on, hold on, hold on. Would you say a non-Jew can lead services in a Jewish community?
I've never thought about that. I
Would
don't
you
know if
say a
there's,
child of 10 can lead
I,
services in a
I'm sure
non-Jewish
we
community?
have no problem with a child of 10 if it was a boy. Their
You would have
problem,
problems if it would, no, a child under the age of bar mitzvah cannot lead.
and also I don't know you well enough, but I spent my life in the professional Jewish community.
You're right. Mhm.
This is dancing on the head of a pin.
That's what we
Yeah.
do. That's our
I
favorite
know.
dance.
I know. And this is not always the best way. And I'm not, oh, tikkun is everything. And that's
No,
all
no, no.
Judaism is.
I understand. But
Okay.
but I will say, okay, so I appreciate you're raising that. And my response was always, and I interacted a lot with Orthodox, particularly the year I lived in Israel, and even here with Chabad. And my goal is always to learn. And I'm never going to convince them what they're doing is wrong. So that's a fruitless discussion. But they know a lot of stuff that I don't know. So that's my goal.
And another thing, and I don't know about here at the beach because I don't know. Chabad is not like other Orthodoxy. They're much more open. Their job is my son-in-law was complaining when he heard this story. Well, they were always stopping him when he was in college
Mhm.
to lay fill-in, and they're proselytizing. I said they only proselytize Jews.
Right.
They do.
Yes.
They are just trying to bring Jews back to Judaism.
And
That's
the underlying theology, I think, is important to understand. In Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, every time a Jew does a mitzvah, a little bit of the universe is healed. And if Jews don't do mitzvahs, every time, guys like me and Alan don't put on tefillin in the morning, we have missed an opportunity to heal the world. So they are obsessed, I would say, with this idea, women lighting candles, keeping kosher, and so on. By the way, not coming to services because it's not a mitzvah. It's not commanded of a woman, but keeping kosher, separating a little pinch of dough when you bake bread. I mean, there's a lot of mitzvot that apply to women. And every time you fail to do it, an opportunity to make the universe a better place is missed. So that's the underlying theology, which I don't agree with, but I certainly understand it. and I'm absolutely certain I'm not going to convince them that it's silly.
No,
But that's the
no.
reason they stopped me. And, when you're in Israel, it happens a lot, right, Alan?
Well, I was,
Well, Israel is different, in my opinion, way different.
why is
And
it
I,
different? Why is this real different?
because, well, if this is sort of a side, but very important issue. Religion is supported by the government, by the taxpayers of everyone, all the citizens of Israel.
Well, here
And
too.
mm,
Yeah, but she's going to make a point
they
other
have to
than that.
raise their own money here. Orthodoxy here, and therefore, a
Mhm.
lot of the women and the men get secular educations in the United States and other places in the world where they don't have government funding. And so I have a lot of respect for these guys. They knock themselves out on building these communities, and they're all twofers. It's always
Mhm.
within a wife. You rarely would meet a single man or
It's a
two men.
mitzvah to be married and have children.
Right. And they get the work because while we were talking with him, kibitzing with him, it was during the davening, he said, "Oh, come to our house for Shabbat dinner right now. We'll go upstairs." And then he said, "Or you'll come tomorrow." They've got all the tables and chairs out. So it's a twofer there. You get the women as well as the rabbi. It's not like in our kind of congregation. Maybe
Mhm.
you got a Rebbitzin who's involved, or you got a Rebbitzin who's not, or has a different life.
Right.
So I have a lot of respect for what they
Mhm.
do here,
Mhm.
and they have to create that all on their own.
Yes.
And that means that different Chabads, like I live in the San Fernando Valley, and there's a lot of them, they each have their own character because it's that guy and whatever he creates.
Yep. Okay. I know, Bryce, you have your hand up.
Yeah, a couple things to add into what Lois is talking about. One is you kind of got one hand and another hand here with this definitional thing. Well, women are excused from time-bound observances because they need to stay home and raise the children, and they need to stay home and raise the children because they're kind of they're excused from all that kind of stuff. They don't need. So I mean,
I don't
they
know
could
why you're
certainly not
making a
be
face
excused
and
from it. They could certainly not be excused from it, and the men could certainly pitch in, and it would be more equitable. But that's not the way they wanted to work it, and they've got their own sweet
I think
deal.
there was a
You know?
practical reality of in breastfeeding can't really be shared.
Well,
yeah,
you know what? I mean,
but Judaism is patriarchal in its origin. I
well,
mean,
of
there's
course
no.
it is,
there's-
and it's going to stay patriarchal that way until
Well,
women
I
push
would
and
say
push
it
and
is not.
push.
It is not patriarchal in conservative and Reform Judaism.
Well, that's what you get when women push.
And Bryce and Stephen, somehow, someone like me and thousands of women like me have also raised our children
Mhm.
and had a profession
Exactly.
and participated in any way we wanted in the Jewish world.
Do you
But
consider?
I mean, there is
yourself-
there's a fundamental problem that if you just have a service in the morning, mom and dad can't both go if you have small children.
Unless you bring
Now,
them.
once you have, I mean, maybe grandparents and so on. And the system is patriarchal. I mean, there's no point in
Well,
pretending.
it's kind of the
not.
point, when the patriarchs are in charge and sitting on top and get to make the rules and make the definitions and decide things, don't be surprised.
Yeah, but they're also binding themselves to a lot more observance. Alan.
Louis, do you consider yourself during this thousands of women in professional, do you consider your Jewish practice to be traditional and orthodox?
No, I'm
Well,
a
then-
conservative Jew. I have a lot. I grew up in a very classical Reform congregation.
Okay, so
in the-
so the other part only applies to the way women, I mean, because the way I understand it in anything but Orthodox in Chabad is a different category in how women are treated for lots of things, and so that it's strictly an Orthodox issue. When you said yourself, like thousands of women, have raised children and had professions. Well, you're not in the category of Orthodox women.
No, but Lois is making a point that you can do both. You can have a career
Yeah.
But I'm
well,
saying,
and
and
raise
some
children.
of those, what is, not necessarily Chabad, I don't know what all their things are. I'm not an expert, but there's modern Orthodox, when I have
Of
close,
course.
Lois, did you ever see the movie Spinal Tap? This is Spinal Tap. Did you remember the interview with the guitar player when he said, "Yeah, I got these special amps. They go to 11." And the guy said, "Well, you know," he said, when I'm playing at 10, and then I want to turn up to 11." And he goes, "Why don't you just turn down to 9?" And then goes, "Well, these go to 11." That's the position you're in, Lois.
I don't understand that one, but I
Yeah,
I
understand.
think, Lois,
understand your
well, I
point.
mean, that you keep explaining the situation about being, the fact that, men can do this and women can do this, and women can do much more than just stay at home and breastfeed babies. But, you keep hearing, well, no, they have to do this because
My
it's the way
point
Jewish women
is
do it.
that even Orthodoxy has made all kinds of changes based on what's in Torah. They don't have slaves anymore.
Right. The point is,
But
and I said it
somehow
before, where there's a
they have
rabbinic
hung
will,
on to this stuff, and the
where there,
women themselves buy into this, some of them. And I'm not defending reform. I grew up reform. I changed to conservative because of ideological problems. I had reform, and they've changed now. I mean, they're Zion. When I grew up, they were not Zionist in the reform movement.
right.
So things have evolved, and I have a lot of respect for Chabad. In some ways more than traditional Orthodoxy because of who they are and what they do and what they've discovered. But their stuff on women, they can kiss my fat Hungarian.
So what I would say is, I mean, you're responding to the idea where there's a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way. And in the case of women being counted in a minyan and being on the other side of a mechitza, there is not a rabbinic will. There are, I think Alan has run across this with me, there are now Orthodox women being ordained as rabbis. I'm not
yeah.
exactly sure what individual role they
Rabbanot,
fill.
they call them.
Sorry?
They call them Rabbanot.
Right. Or I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Well,
and
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem with gendered language in Hebrew. But
Right.
and that was
Right.
actually a huge issue. You may not believe this, but in the reform movement, I'm now looking at my ordination certificate, and in English it says rabbi, but then in Hebrew it says Morenu Harav,
Hi, Sarah.
and the women's certificates.
Oh my God, I've been listening
Whoops,
right
hold on
now.
a second. Let me mute Julie.
Rabbi?
And the women's certificates were different than the men's. In English, they were the same, but in Hebrew, they were different. And within the last year, the Hebrew Union College has offered basically to issue new ordination certificates to anyone and to
But not
anyone.
for that reason.
I'm sorry?
Not for that reason.
No, exactly for that reason. Because yes, no. No, there's also the reason of the individuals who sign their certificate.
Right.
But
That was the reason that
also, look, I'm
came
close to this and I'm certain of this, but also one of the objections was the language used for women's ordination, and I don't know when it changed, but for many, many years described the role of the woman rabbi differently in the Hebrew. In the English, it was the same. And so that was also a reason they changed it. Also, there were a number of professors at Hebrew Union College who were pretty awful, and they signed the way an ordination certificate is written. I'm looking at mine right now. They're signed by faculty, and and not all those faculty are admired. So people wanted to get different certificates.
They were unrabbied.
Well, they were not nice people, to put it mildly, in some cases. But anyway, it is an interesting discussion. In some ways, we discuss this when we discuss the the different, oh, I should stop screen share. I don't know why I still have the screen share on. In some ways, we discuss it when we discuss the different movements. I love Yitz Greenberg's comment, which I have quoted many times. He is a modern Orthodox, liberal Orthodox rabbi, and his comment was, "I don't care which movement you're a part of as long as you're ashamed of it." And I would say there are embarrassing flaws in all of the movements, and I certainly include reform among them. And you know, my goal always is to learn. So I
And to
remember,
teach.
well, I love teaching, but I can't teach unless I learn. But I remember once, you know, in Sfat, visiting Joseph Caro's home, and you know, the Orthodox rabbi, Orthodox institution. He's the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and I just spent hours there, you know, talking to him about Shulchan Aruch and asking questions. And you know, he asked me, and I said, I'm a Reform rabbinic student, and he was shocked. He basically said he didn't think Reform Jews were really interested in this stuff. And I can tell you, some of my colleagues in Israel, who are now rabbis, would go and they would meet Orthodox Jews on the street, and they would just get into arguments and fight with them. And you know, to me, that's sort of a wasted effort. It's a missed opportunity.
When we walked in, now I'm remembering, when we walked in, because of the way place the door was
Mhm.
into this big space, we walked on the men's side. We didn't
Right.
know any.
Right.
And that they had to move us right away to the other side.
Mhm.
Chas v'chalila, our femaleness should be near their maleness. I mean,
I mean, chas v'chalila, you should be served pork in a synagogue, right? Because it's against. If you went to a conservative synagogue, you would be upset if they served pork and shellfish. So
this is an identity issue of a human. It's not like pork. It's
you
different.
would be offended if a priest led services. And I mean, he's a human.
Why
and
can't Kohanim lead services?
I think this is something
I'm talking about
we
Christian
have to
priests.
talk. Sonia has to be in the room.
Oh, it's worse in the Sephardic world. It's worse in the world that she grew up in.
Different. It's like what racism feels like.
Yes.
When you are the recipient.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
This is my ignorance. So you set up a matzutza if you're going to have religious service and the men are separated. If that same amount of chairs were set up and there was a discussion studying a Torah, a class of study, the men and women could sit together. Is that right? Or
My understanding is men and women can sit together. I mean, I'm trying to think. I've attended lectures at Chabad. I'm certain there wasn't a mechitza. I actually don't remember whether there was women, but I think as long as you're not having an actual service,
okay,
men and women can sit together. There's a whole issue with women's voice and women not singing, which you know is offensive, and I think absurd. And you know, in the Sephardic world where Sonia grew up, women were treated as objects to decorate, which was very nice because the women would wear gold bangles and have jewelry and so on. But they you know, the men were on the pedestal. And I always comment that maybe I shouldn't do this while we're recording, but I always comment that in the world that Sonia grew up in, men were placed on a pedestal. And in the Ashkenazi world where I grew up, women were placed on a pedestal. And so Sonia and I have this fantastic relationship because our instincts are to be, you know, kind and cautious and caring. So the typical, you know, Ashkenazi humor, which is sort of take my wife, please. Basically the basic Ashkenazi put down the wife humor. Sonia finds legitimately horrible and offensive. I mean, relationship breaking offensive. I have had to adjust my sense of humor very carefully.
So I was going to finish. You answered my question, but let me tell you where I was going with the the separating the men and women. So I spent one of my days in the Pardes Institute in Jerusalem, and as at the invitation of Rabbi Leon Morris, the head guy, and they announced after lunch they were having a learner's minyan. And so I thought, being light on my knowledge of these different things being reform, I would go. I don't know what the learning part meant, but here's what happened. In the same Beit Midrash where all the men and women were together.
Beit Midrash is a house of study, a school.
Yeah. Yeah, so the school for this classes that I was in was a mix of men and women. And I know that on some level, the practices are modern Orthodox, but it wouldn't have been noticeable based on the morning. After lunch, when they announced this learner's mincha, mincha service, all of a sudden from nowhere, 10 people came out and they dragged in these partitions. And so now women are sitting in the same room, but only sitting separate from the men in a very low barrier, you know, symbolically. It's not like it's soundproof, or to your point, Michael, about listening to voices. And I was like, never been through this. Now I'm sitting just with men, and there was nothing learning about it. I mean, there was nothing about the liturgy. I was hoping I would learn something. They just rambled through a short service, an afternoon service, and then they took the barriers down and everybody sat down with each other. So this experience was what I was trying to share, because I didn't understand where the boundaries were on when men have to be separated.
Yeah, my understanding is it's at prayer.
Okay.
And
Well-
and the supposition is it's too distracting.
Well, yeah, right. So, right, we're so irresistible.
Yeah,
It works the other way too, you know.
So I conducted the first, and to my knowledge, only mixed gender religious service that has ever taken place in the Kingdom of Morocco. When we visited Morocco for Sonia's parents' 50th anniversary, and I officiated at the B'nai Mitzvah of Sonia's two sons, and there was a family synagogue in this little cul-de-sac that her great-grandfather had created. And there was no women's section in the synagogue. The women would sit out on the porch and chat, or even in the garden outside, and they never entered the synagogue in prayer. And so we weren't going to do that. So we had the women there. And the interesting thing was the women, other than, you know, Sonia and our immediate family, were kind of mystified by this. So they insisted on sitting in the back and not just among the rest. I mean, it's a very small room. But to my knowledge and my expectation, it may be the one and only time a mixed gender service has taken place in the Kingdom of Morocco, because it's Sephardic synagogues and they are all separated, men and women.
Yeah, I don't know the whole learning calendar of this Chabad right here. It's right here in Hollywood Beach. But he announced a women's learning session on Shabbat.
And it's probably led by his wife. Yeah.
You know, I don't know. But my guess is they study separately too. Just like they
No,
kids
but even Adat Elohim, we used to have men's Torah study, and there still is women's Torah study, ironically led by a man, by Ken Elman.
and they, yeah, the kids are separated fairly early in their lives at school.
Yep. Okay, well, I think we've explored that. I think it's a very interesting subject to explore, and I appreciate your raising it. And don't let it happen again. Oh, I'm only kidding.
I loved it. I was like, how did you get us in here, Joyce?
I'll tell you one of my experiences, Lois, when I'm living in Jerusalem, shows you how unconscious I was. I thought one Saturday morning, I'm going to go to the Great Synagogue on I think it's on
King George
Street. There's this magnificent synagogue, and from the outside, it actually looks like what we suppose the temple would look like. So I'm walking, and maybe it wasn't a Shabbat service; it was just a regular service. I'm walking inside, and I see stairways going up to the balcony, and I said, you know, it'd be pretty cool to sit kind of in the back of the balcony so I
I
can
do.
get an overview of everything going on. And then as I get upstairs, I realize it's all women up there.
He
And
thought it was Grauman's Chinese.
Yeah, that's what
exactly.
it looks like. But you know, when I was
And so
there,
I hurried. It was almost, I had the same feeling like if you walk into a woman's bathroom, unexpectedly, I ran downstairs where God intended me to sit.
oh, well, I was just wandering around because it was a weekday and there was no service. And when I didn't think, I guess I didn't think about the separation part. I just wanted to take some pictures of the bima from upstairs, and I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah,
But
and I
that,
don't think there's any problem with that, as long as there's
No.
not a prayer service. And of course, that's actually pretty common that women are in a balcony, so you can see and hear everything. That serves as a mechitza, as a separation. In other places like the synagogue in Prague, the women's section is behind a wall with small holes in it. And the interesting thing is I once went there for a regular weekday morning service, and that's where the morning service was conducted, because it's a smaller room and you don't get that many people for an average, everyday morning service. But it was in the women's section. So there's nothing inherently female about a women's section, other than it's the mixing during prayer. And it's interesting to me that in Islam, it's the same thing. Women sit separately in prayer than men. I find it actually interesting that that doesn't take place in Christianity. I'm not 100% sure why, but most fundamentalist religions have rules of modesty, whether it's covering up or keeping your head covered or something. So I just find that, I think that's a characteristic of fundamentalist approaches to religion. And that's true in fundamentalist Christian, certainly Muslim, particularly some cultures, the women are in the barakas.
There was an argument, because I was in the room when it was happening, at my conservative synagogue, Valley Beth Shalom, about whether they would allow women to wear a kippah or not.
Right.
We were, what? We were like, what do you care? What difference does it make to you? And of course, they abandoned that.
Yeah, well, the issue, and the reason I admire conservative Judaism is they struggle with issues of Jewish law.
Correct.
So again, I would say, on certain issues of Jewish law, conservative Judaism is pretty tight and rigid, kashrut being one. Women wearing a talit, a yarmulke, even tefillin. I'm pretty sure in conservative Judaism, women are allowed to wear tefillin. I don't know if it's mandatory.
It depends on the synagogue. When I used to host a lot of Israelis here, because I was the overall supervisor of the Tel Aviv LA partnership, and Israelis came to visit us all the time here in LA. The first thing I would try to explain to them, they had no idea of how we worked. And I would say to them, there's no Jew in charge here. And that's really different than Israel. And
what do you mean by Jewish?
You mean like a chief rabbi?
Well, I'm going to
there's
let you
no
guys,
Jew in charge. Every synagogue can do what it wants to do.
Within limits. In the conservative movement, that's for example, a conservative rabbi cannot conduct an interfaith wedding. That'll get you kicked out of the organization.
They have all kinds of rules, as you know.
Yeah, halacha is binding.
Our current rabbi, they threatened to throw him out because he didn't do a full 10 years as in his first congregation. And I don't know, I wasn't in the room, I don't know exactly, but they said, fine, so kick him out. And that was the end of the conversation. So I think there's a lot of flexibility. I don't know about the issue of marriages. I don't know.
But your comment about Israel applies to the rabbinate, not to non-Orthodox conservative and reform practices in Israel. Even though the numbers are small, the practices are comparable to American practices. and the melodies are often different. I enjoy those differences, but I mean, the Israel part is a little more centralized, I suppose, that the rabbinate in the Orthodox, you can answer this better probably, Rabbi, is the Orthodox synagogues in America, are they coordinated in a centralized way like the rabbinate is in Israel?
No, so there are rabbinical associations, but in the Orthodox world, there are many of them. So, for example, Chabad has its own rabbinic association. They are
Okay.
not in the same rabbinic association as modern Orthodox rabbis. And there's, it's like there's 20 or 30 different kashrut certifying organizations. So there are many different Orthodox organizations of congregations and rabbis.
The really only modern Orthodox synagogue left in Los Angeles is B'nai David Judea. And Yosef Kanevsky, their current rabbi, who's been the rabbi for a long time, he hired a woman, Rabbanot, and they threw him out of every committee he was on. The whatever it was,
You're talking about
OU.
in his movement.
What?
When you say committees, you're not talking about committees in the synagogue.
No, the committees he was on and
Right,
the
right,
Orthodox
right,
structure or whatever.
Right,
I
right,
mean, so and that's quite a while ago.
right. Yeah,
So it's controversial even in a very liberal place like B'nai David Judea.
Right. And I would say, I just happen to know this because my synagogue shared a building with the Church of Christ. And Church of Christ, until recently in this congregation, a woman couldn't read in front of the congregation. They wouldn't have any music at any service in the
Wow.
congregation. So, different groups set their own rules.
Correct.
And
But Alan, but it's different in Israel. I mean, because there's a Sephardic.
I don't understand that part. Oh, there are chief rabbis for Ashkenazi and Sephardic, and that guy.
So now you're talking about national governance, and you have a chief rabbi of cities, states where there is a state religion. So this is an Orthodox Jewish principle. If a nation has an official state religion, then there is a chief rabbi. So there's a chief rabbi of Great Britain, because the Church of England is the state religion of Great Britain.
Okay.
There is no chief rabbi of the United States because there's no state religion. There are chief rabbis in Muslim lands. There are chief rabbis in Israel because there are state religions.
Be careful who you vote for.
That's a good point.
Israel has separate Ashkenazi and Sephardic chief rabbis, which most places don't.
I don't know about most places, but that is true in Israel. Okay, gang, I'm gonna go. But yeah, it's a very interesting discussion, and I was gonna say I had a funny.
Let me just one last thing. There is a United Synagogue for the conservative movement in URJ, of course, but for the Reform, there's also this. I don't remember what it's called, but there is an umbrella organization like Conservative and Reform for the Orthodox movement, right?
Yes, but it would be an organization not of all Orthodoxy because it doesn't cover Hasidic, and there are 20 different Hasidic groups or more, and there's also the Mitnagdim. So there are, when I gave the talk on Orthodox Judaism, there is both a congregational organization and there is a rabbinic association for Orthodoxy, but it doesn't cover all Orthodox because before Reform, there were no movements. You were just Jewish.
Right.
And there were different groups of Jews and they had their own organizations. The first movement per se was the Reform movement in the 1820s. And the Orthodox movement was a response to the Reform movement in terms of organizing.
You said Orthodox, you meant that, not conservative, right?
Yeah, conservative is much later.
It came later. Okay,
Yes.
got it.
Yeah, conservative really starts around the turn of the century.
Right.
What my guideline seems to be is that if you can raise money for it, here in the United States, you can do it.
Well, I mean, you're one step.
I have no idea what you mean by that.
I like your statement, except that that's step two. Step one is you identify something that's not being met in a way that the people want to meet a need. And then they have to, then if they can raise money, then they
Start a synagogue or a temple and hire someone to be your clergy. If you can raise the money, you could do it. Nobody
Yeah,
can
and there
tell
are
you.
many unaffiliated congregations. I mean,
Yep.
I served one, the one in Ojai.
Yeah.
Is unaffiliated.
That's
one
all I'm saying. You may not be accepted by everybody else or a centralized group, but if you can do that and rent space somewhere or meet in someone's basement and not get in trouble with the other people in the neighborhood, you can do it here.
You're limiting it to synagogues, and I'm broadening it in the sense that we have thousands of Jewish organizations in America from that could have been done differently, but each of the ones were created because there was a need felt by the founders. But step two is your point. You don't do anything with this unfilled need unless you can raise money.
Yeah, but
Right,
what I would say is, just like I think Jews should belong to a synagogue. You know, my congregation in Ojai, and actually, Alan, you were instrumental at Adat Elohim. Congregations, if they want to have rabbis, should support the training of rabbis. If you want to have prayer books, you should support that.
That's an American practice. In Europe,
yes, no, that's what I'm talking about.
Europe and in Israel, for the non-Orthodoxy, is not so simple. You know?
Right. So I'm not talking about that. But
Yeah.
but just like I believe Jews should be part of a synagogue, I believe congregations should be part of a movement. And you know, if for no other reason, then if you want to participate in the benefits that movements bring, such as having rabbis and having prayer books and things like that, you want to pay your fair share.
Well, there's an unaffiliated synagogue called Etz Chaim, not the same one we know in your area, and they identify themselves as unaffiliated, as a blend of conservative and reform. And their service.
What area? I don't know which.
This is Palo Alto. I mean, it's a synagogue near me. Yeah. And the reason is that their members come from reform and conservative, and they develop this, worship services and things that aren't one movement. They could be, my opinion today, they could pick one, but they choose not to.
Right.
And for other reasons, maybe it's partly because the movements require dues,
Yes, I think that's the reason.
Except the problem is your other part, which is this particular synagogue or ones like them, they're not helping to fund the creating of new rabbis, because the HUC and JTS get their money from the members, right?
From the congregational movement.
But there's AJR, which is Academy of Jewish Religion here in Los Angeles. They don't get any money from any. They raise all their own money, and they've been doing better than both seminaries here in LA.
That's true.
I'm sure you read it, Michael, about the change that was made in the curriculum this week at HUC.
Yes.
And it's because of what AJR, I mean, I don't know exactly what the line was, but what they're doing, AJR has been doing since it's
Is this about is this spouses, the spouses?
No, there's something actually this week. HUC has announced, you can look online.
I got it from Andrew, but I didn't read it yet. Okay.
Yeah, HUC has announced both a change in curriculum, but the major thing is opening a virtual path where you can study remotely.
I noticed
and it's interesting because it looks like they're encouraging second career rabbis, which of course I was one of, and 25 years ago when I started at HUC, they were very supportive of me. And then what they found was the graduates, second career rabbis, were having difficulty finding jobs. So they stopped being encouraging. I don't think they took any official stance, but they stopped being very supportive and encouraging of second career people coming into the rabbinate. So, but now there's a real shortage of rabbis. And so I think, certainly Reformed congregations are hiring AJR graduates. And a bigger problem, which concerns the rabbis greatly, is what I call ordination by Vistaprint. Namely, how do you become a rabbi? Have cards printed. Okay, you too can be a rabbi.
Oy.
I mean, that's how I have my cards printed. I'm now not
Well,
affiliated
the
with
whole Orthodox movement, they ordain
sorry?
their own.
Who does?
The Orthodox movements give smicha
Yes, but it's a
to
rigorous
whoever they
program.
feel
But
like.
there are now online programs that will say they will ordain rabbis that have a very short program, and it's not at all rigorous, and people are really just getting quickie rabbinic certification. And in many cases, congregations really don't care, because if they learn enough to lead a service and give nice sermons and do funerals and weddings, that's what the many
said.
congregations really care about.
If you can pay for it, if the congregation can pay for it, they can do what they want.
Yes.
That's America.
Yes. Okay, gang. We have gone on.
Everybody.
Okay. Good night.
Nice,
Take
thanks. Okay, thanks for Lois. Thanks a lot.